Aristotle's Unmoved Mover. Aristotle, as we noted before, is, or rather was because he's dead, a teleologist. So he believes that the world has a purpose, an end, or goal, and the world itself has many ends in terms of the entities within it. So the activities of the things within the world aim towards various ends. They're attempting to actualize their potentials. We also talked earlier about Aristotle's view of matter. And matter is a collection of potentials and needs to be actualized by something else, specifically the forms actualize the matter. So prime matter, which is often attributed to Aristotle, although there's some debate about whether he really accepted prime matter or not, is, again, raw potentiality that gets shaped and molded by the forms. And the analogy I used before, of course, is like clay. Although the analogy quickly breaks down because clay has features and qualities of its own, shape and mass, density and volume, etc. But you can think of it kind of metaphorically, the clay being like matter and then being shaped into various forms by the forms. Now what about the unmoved mover? Well, the unmoved mover is very important for Aristotle for a variety of reasons, which we'll see. One of which is it explains, how motion gets started, so kind of the origin story of motion in the world. Also, as we'll see, we look at our good dead friend St. Thomas Aquinas, the unmoved mover becomes something borrowed, or stolen perhaps, by our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas to argue for God's existence. So a very important concept. Now, it may seem odd that Aristotle would have a unmoved mover that gets everything moving, but also embrace the notion of an eternal universe. That the universe has always been and always shall be. So one of the big questions about the universe is, of course, has it always been? Will it always be? Does it have a beginning? Does it have an end? The general view in science today, because, Big Bang, and they have on the end of it, some have various views like heat death of the universe, and sometimes like odd names like the Big Rip, etc. For real, that's a real thing. It may not be real, but it's something that people who do the science stuff talk about. And so kind of the current view among scientists is there's a beginning and end to the universe. Now, of course, you could broaden the question, what if you expand beyond this universe? Is there a beginning to everything taken in the broadest sense possible? And is there a potential end to everything in the broadest sense possible? Now, Aristotle took the universe again to be eternal. So he didn't accept that there would be a first cause in time. So it wasn't that there was a, before the universe began, and then something temporally before that caused it to occur. So he assumes an eternal universe that has always been in motion. Now, he shared this view with other Greek thinkers, that it would be absurd to think the universe had a beginning in which it arose from nothing. So, if the universe is eternal and did not arise from nothing, it had no beginning, so what then caused the motion of things? So his concern about sort of the beginning is not what created everything out of nothing, because he doesn't think that's an occurrence. He thinks it has always been. But he believes there must be a source of motion for everything. So his sort of beginning question is, what is the source of all motion that we observe? And of course, don't observe. Now, on his view, the source of motion cannot itself be in motion. Why? Well, this would require a mover to set it in motion, and this would result in an infinite regress. One we'll later see utilized by our good dead friend St. Thomas Aquinas in his way of motion argument for God's existence. Now, if everything had to be set in motion, then the first mover itself would need to be set in motion, and then couldn't be the first mover. You need a mover, before that to move it, and a mover for that to infinity, and nothing would move. So the mover, you may wonder, why is it called the unmoved mover? And the reason why is because it's going to move other things without being moved itself, hence unmoved mover. Now, as I mentioned, our good dead friend St. Thomas Aquinas later draws a conclusion in his 5 ways that the origin of motion is God. But Aristotle's unmoved mover is not God. I mean, for one reason is Aristotle was doing his stuff long before, Christianity, well before, notions of monotheism were well established. And so he didn't have a concept of the type of, the monotheistic God that people talk about today. So, also, conceptually, his unmoved mover is nothing like, sort of the standard God. The usual conception of the monotheistic God, which is greatly oversimplifying things, is that God in this sense is transcendent, anthropomorphic, as to say he's like, or rather we're like him, and this God is a personal God, although there are other conceptions of God as well. But Aristotle's unmoved mover is not like that. It's not like us, it's not a personal God, and a good question is, why not? Well, this arises from the fact that it's an unmoved mover, because, kind of oddly enough, or perhaps consistently enough, if it could care, then it would be affected, moved emotionally, by other things. It would not be the unmoved mover. So, it does not care. The unmoved mover, of course, is unmoving, hence the name. It's not in motion, so it's not going to be the efficient cause. So, Aristotle, as we noted before in the previous video, Aristotle has 4 conceptions of cause. And so the unmoved mover is not an efficient cause. So what type of cause is it? How does it do what it does? That is to say, how does it move everything without itself being moved? Well, his answer is this. It is a final cause. That is to say, it is the end or goal of everything. It also explains the teleology of the world because, being the final cause, everything, roughly put, tries to be like it, roughly speaking. And so it is the final cause of everything, the end goal of all things. Because, according to Aristotle at least, what beings that are lacking, beings that have, just have potential but not full actuality, according to Aristotle, they try to, be all they can be. To steal, a slogan that used to be used to talk about, the army and commercials. And so beings seek to become fully actualized, and so they desire to be like the unmoved mover, which is fully actualized. Now, of course, different things would seek different types of actualization. As we talked about earlier, acorns, their final, cause would be becoming an oak tree to make more acorns. And then other entities would have other, other types of actualization. Because it's different things to be, well, different things. Now, one way to look at it is that all things desire, perhaps metaphorically speaking in some cases, to be like the unmoved mover. They try to become fully actualized, to be all they can be. But the unmoved mover, of course, can't reciprocate this desire. It is unmoved. Emotionally and, of course, motion-wise. So the unmoved mover, not God in the sense of most monotheistic faiths, and it is unmoving, and it's not affected by, doesn't care about us. What other qualities does it have? Well, one feature it's got is it's got the highest degree of reality. How or why? Well, in Aristotle's view, all the other stuff has unrealized potential. It's not fully what it could be. What is purely actual for him would not need to change at all, because it has no potential left. Now, normally you talk about something having no potential, that's, being an insult. So if someone, pointed to someone and said, that person has no potential, you'd probably take it as a pretty mean insult. And it'd be odd to think, that if a person didn't have any potential because they're all actuality, that would actually be pretty great because it'd be fully actualized. And so the unmoved mover doesn't have any potential because it is fully actual. So having the highest degree of reality, according to Aristotle, it must be engaged in the highest activity. Now, Aristotle in his Ethics, he, thought through like what are the proper ends, etc. And he takes the highest activity, which shouldn't be surprising for someone who's a philosopher, to be thought. And this also helps explains why humans, on his view, are the highest of natural creatures. Because, according to Aristotle, his definition of human is we're rational animals. And this makes us the highest natural creature. It's because rationality, for Aristotle, are really important. And so, by analogy, if our rationality makes us the highest of natural creatures, by analogy, the unmoved mover must be thinking in the highest rational manner. It must be, the greatest thinker of all, the most rational. But you may be wondering, what does the unmoved mover think about? Because if it's thinking about particulars, say the upcoming, 2020 election, or it's thinking about, a movie, or, thinking about a squirrel running around in the park, well, then this would place change and division within it, because it would have these things, these thoughts of changing things, and its thoughts would be divided. So, according to Aristotle, the unmoved mover can't be thinking about particulars, stuff, the imperfect things in this world. And so this will sound kind of odd, but the object of the unmoved mover's thoughts must be both unchanging and undivided. Because if its thoughts were, the object of its thoughts were changing and divided, then it would be changing and it would be divided, which would be a problem because the unmoved mover is supposed to be, pure actuality and, have the highest degree of reality. So what's it doing? Well, to quote Aristotle, translated of course, he says, "Therefore it must be of itself that the divine thought thinks, since it is the most excellent of all things, and its thinking is thinking on thinking," from the Metaphysics. So it's thinking about thinking. That's what he says. Now, this view is really important because it had huge influence on later thinkers, the Stoics, the Neoplatonists, and of course, especially our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas. So the idea of the unmoved mover, as we'll see in the future, was a foundation for one of his 5 ways, the way of motion. And so that brings us to the end of our good dead friend Aristotle's Metaphysics, closing appropriately enough with the unmoved mover, the final cause of everything. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.